Hello everyone, this is Steve Barrett. I'm the editorial director of PRWeek. I'm delighted to be joining you for a panel discussion about racial injustice, communications, business and society. An important discussion and one that we felt we needed to convene with some key stakeholders in our industry. So I'm delighted to be joined by Deisha Barnett, who's works at Metro Atlantic Chamber, who's Chief Brand and Communications Officer and Head of Diversity and Inclusion. We've got Jerilan Greene, who's Global Chief Communications Officer at Young Brands and Chief Public Affairs Officer. We've got Soon-Mi Kim, who is EVP and Global Diversity and Inclusion Leader at Novelli, the Omnicom PR firm. And we've got Craig Buchholz, who is the new SVP of Global Communications at GM. So welcome everybody to this panel discussion, and thank you for joining us. I wanted to start with you, Deisha, and just kick off the conversation. What's your reaction been to the last 10 days to the events that sparked what's happened in terms of protests and violence on the streets, but also the ongoing issues that are being reflected that just don't seem to go away and that keep coming up, and we don't seem to be moving forward as a society. What's your reaction been, and how has it impacted your team? You're based in the Atlanta area, and your organization.
So, I think before I can even talk about how it's impacted me as a leader, I have to start with just how it has impacted me personally. And I think it's interesting that a lot of the conversation right now has been related to, recent issues, things that have been, specific to police brutality or just other acts of racism. A guy can't even go bird watching in a park these days, apparently, if you're Black. So we're really, we've seen these things because of the iPhone videos and social media, but the reality is the trend goes back much further than that, Steve. I mean, I think a lot of us, I just read a comment in social media. We are traumatized going back to Emmett Till and slavery. My mother was a history teacher in middle school, and so I grew up, with a real deep understanding of Black history. And the reality is that our country has never dealt with the issue of race. We were built on the premise of racism, and we have never dealt with that issue. And it continues to light and play out. And until we deal with it, and these are my mom's words, I should sort of shout her out, Dorothy Galbraith. We have never dealt with the issue of race. That is a quote from a history teacher. And until we deal with it, we will continue to have to face the realities of it. And Black people will have to face the negative repercussions. To be very specific, I am a mom. I'm raising Black boys, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old. I have Black brothers who live in New Jersey. I got a Black husband. I had a Black father. I could go on. And so I'm trying to show up at work with the authenticity and frankly, the courage that comes with that. I got to say some things these days without fear for retaliation. And that's a hard thing to do as a Black woman in corporate America in a position of leadership. And so I've cried every day. I'm like, I say, here I go again, and I'm trying to just, tune into it and let those emotions come through. And I'm trying to be raw as a leader, and I'm trying to ask my team to also be raw. I think brands have to be raw. If we're not able to really feel the emotion that is so true for so many people, we won't do the right thing. We won't say the right thing. We won't be right as a community. And I think the other piece that has been so important to us at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, where we represent lots of large corporations who are based in Atlanta, and their CEOs come in our doors regularly or on Zoom or in conversations like this these days. I think we're trying to really embrace the idea that business can affect change quickly and at scale when we decide to. And so we have to make a decision that we want to take this issue on, not just focus on police brutality and the things that are immediate, but focus on the systemic things that are in place in our society. Business can change these things. We can push our leaders in government locally and nationally if we really, really decide to.
Yeah.
Sorry to be wrong. Really passionate about it.
No, understood totally. And I think we should get into what business is doing, has done, and what it should do. We'll definitely get into that, and where communications fits into that. Jerilan, you're based down in Louisville and working for Young Brands. What's your reaction been, and your organization and your brands?
Thanks, Steve. Very similar to Deisha. From a personal standpoint, you're kind of watching the movie you never wanted to see unfold. And, with the way that we process information these days, even with all the horrific things that we see from a day-to-day basis, a lot of times you just let it roll off your back. But this was one of those moments where I think I and a lot of other African Americans and just people in general had to say, wait a minute, this is very different. So for our company, over the last couple of weeks, we've been watching it very closely. I think, we were talking to different colleagues around the company, trying to understand how people were processing it. I think what we've tried to do is shift into a mode of deep listening within the company, not something that many companies do all the time. So we've been talking to African Americans, people of color, having conversations. But then along the way, I think as the public outrage grew, it became clear to us that we needed to take a position. And so luckily, I think, we have a CEO that is a big champion of diversity and inclusion. We've been on a very intentional journey on that in the last couple of years. We know we have a lot more work to do in that area. And so it was pretty clear that our stance would be against racism and really leaning into our inclusion, and then realizing that we don't have, all of the answers right now, but we're going to continue to listen, and we're committed to acting, in a very meaningful way. We're also on a journey to really clarify our social purpose as a public company. As you know, we're the parent company of KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell, and now we have the Habit Burger Grill. And so part of what we have said is that we really want to unlock potential in people and communities. But part of that is removing barriers. Part of it is addressing inequality. And so we're still kind of working on the clarity of how we'll proceed. So we're trying to take this real crisis and turn it into an opportunity to figure out how we can leverage our scale to make a difference in the communities where we operate and uplift the people there and the frontline workers that are in those communities as well, many of whom are people of color.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll come on and talk about that a bit more in the rest of the panel. Sunmi, you're based in Atlanta as well, working on the agency side. It's the other thing about this, the developments over the last 10 days, obviously it comes on top of an unprecedented 3-month lockdown with COVID-19 and with times that we've probably never experienced before as well. And it's just to be piling one thing on top of another. How have you found it personally, and what about your teams and your clients at Porter Novelli?
Yeah, I mean, I think with everything that is going on and everything that you expressed, Steve, I mean, I think we have to remember there are like real people that are at the heart of this. And my condolences, my well wishes, my sympathies go out to the Floyd family, to the Taylor family, to the Arbery family, and so many other families. This point in time, those very, I can't even find words, incredibly tragic. I'm actually reminded even of just 4 years ago, right? 4 years ago, I remember in some ways a similar situation when we saw on video Philando Castile die on Facebook Live. Alton Sterling had been killed that week, 2 unarmed Black men at the hands of police. And I remember our office at that time. It was in deep mourning. We didn't really know how to deal with it. Was it just another situation? And I remember a very poignant moment where we did bring people together, and it was not perfect. We didn't know what words to say. But in that moment, our Black colleagues provided an incredible amount of grace to share their experiences with us. And the pain, the rawness of that room was incredibly humbling. And for me personally, was one where like I vow, like I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that I don't fall into a poster I saw that weekend during the protest, which was white silence equals violence. And how am I complicit in my being? So I think about that. And now fast forward to, 4 years later, in this moment in 2020, the ways that we are, focusing our time right now is similar to what Jerilan said with deep listening. We are taking this moment to be very reflective of checking in on our people, of spending time like, okay, how is this a teachable moment where we can really learn? We've got to do our work. And I appreciate the intention of folks that want to go out there and be active and take action. But I think we also have to be careful not to fall into this white savior mode where we need to, again, do our work. Our chief learning and development officer mentioned something that I thought was really, really important, is that similar to the way that we have been sheltering in place during COVID-19 may feel passive. In that same way, listening and learning is not passive. It can be some of the most important things that we can do to move forward with purpose and with intentionality. So just a few thoughts that I would share there.
Yeah, thank you, Sunmi. Craig, there was quite a moving article in Refinery 29 by Danielle Cadet talking about your Black colleagues may look like they're okay, but they're not okay. And I must admit, when the events of 4 years ago happened that Sunmi just referenced, a Black colleague later confided in me that him and his colleagues who were also Black came into the office and just felt that their reality was different to the rest of the people in the office. It wasn't a topic of conversation. It wasn't really being discussed. And yet for them, it was the biggest thing in their lives, and it was all encompassing. What, as a white PR professional, you worked for Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati and now moving up to Detroit for GM, although I'm not sure you've actually moved yet, but what's your reaction been over the last 10 days and how, as a white PR professional?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thanks. That article, the Refinery 29 article, one of the things that I love most about that article is the very last sentence, which is your Black colleagues are not okay and neither should you be. And I think that was really kind of the most poignant moment, which is, we have to be able to engage meaningfully in this. And what's been interesting to me, and I go back to Deisha's comments about companies being the ones to be able to move quickly and at scale, because that's actually what we need here. We can do an entire session on the absence of leadership where it ought to be sitting in other parts of the universe. But for right now, the leadership is sitting with the companies that and the organizations that we represent. What's been really interesting to me is seeing the continuum of where companies are on this journey. So Procter & Gamble, as you may know, is sort of much more on its front foot, has been really trying to lean in on conversations around race, on equality, whether that be gender equality, racial equality, the biases that each of us bring to our work and to our lives every day. And that was an incredibly inspiring and meaningful company to be part of. And that journey has been inspiring to be part of. Not every company is there, but I think each of us, whether we're white PR professionals or any of us within the context of our influence and control, can push the companies that we represent and the organizations that we represent to move along that journey in a way that is meaningful and authentic. And I think the authenticity piece here is so incredibly important. So for GM, we put something out over the weekend that was, more pointed and sharper and more focused than the company has in the past talked about its role in a moment like this. And I feel personally proud of the company. I feel personally proud of the role that my team and I played in trying to deliver that. And it's really about what we can deliver as it relates to action. And I totally agree that the notion of listening and learning isn't passive. It's truly engaging and trying to get to a better place. But the reality here is GM cannot be a P&G today or tomorrow because we haven't earned the credibility to do that, and we haven't listened long enough to figure out what that looks like for us. But what we can do, and what we have done, is to lay down some unequivocal values that the company stands for and some really meaty aspirations. So what you'll hear Mary talking about right now is that we aspire to be the most inclusive company in the world. You will also hear her say, we don't have the roadmap and the playbook for that, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't start to try to figure out how to get there. And that starts with listening to our employees. It starts with listening to our stakeholders. She sent out the letter over the weekend, and within hours, about 20,000 employees had read it, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments, mostly comments of support and encouragement that the employees want to be with us on this journey. But the important ones that we got, I think the most constructive comments that we got, were from employees who say, this doesn't sound like the company that I know. Let me tell you about my story. And to engage with those individuals and to understand then how we can work to make sure that we're creating the conditions internally before we go out externally and start chest thumping on what GM is going to do to be part of the change. Certainly our values are unequivocal, our aspiration is unequivocal, but right now where we are on the journey is to focus on what are we doing internally, how we can leverage our voice externally. But I think every company needs to recognize where they are in this moment and where they want to be, and then authentically engage. Because if you do this too inauthentically, you're going to lose the ability and the license to leverage your voice. And I think companies that I've seen out there right now who have never engaged in a conversation around this, who are participating in Blackout Tuesday and who are doing modified versions of their logo and talking about standing with the Black community, I think is frankly appalling because there's nothing behind it. I think it's a nice sentiment, but the fact of the matter is, this is not an opportunity to jump onto a media moment and try to position yourself as a thought leader. It takes a lot more introspection and a lot more homework and a lot more listening to figure out what is it that you bring to the table in an additive way that contributes to the change we want to see. And that's kind of where we are on the journey right now.
Yeah, building on that, Craig, Deisha, how should brands be responding? We've seen things like Blackout Tuesday. We've seen companies making statements. We've even seen memes on social media of the template, insert company name here, because people are saying this is just opportunistic. It's not authentic. Show me your C-suite. Show me the color of your C-suite. Show me the lack of Black executives in senior levels. We have seen other brands coming out, like Ben & Jerry's has got good plaudits for maybe coming from that authentic place where they already had permission to do it. Ken Frazier, CEO at Merck, one of the more high-profile Black CEOs, great spot on the TV the other morning. What would your advice be to brands and corporations in responding authentically, and also what maybe not responding? What should they be doing?
So I've got so much to say about this. I want to really talk about what we're really dealing with. I mean, in this particular instance, again, personally, as a Black woman, as a Black consumer, I want brands to say what we're talking about. We're not talking about diversity right now. We're not talking about inclusion. We're talking about Black people in America being treated more than unfairly. I don't even know the right word to use to describe what's happened and what happens every single day to your Black customer, to your Black consumer, to your Black colleague who sits next to you and deals with microaggressions and aggressions. I don't even want to call them microaggressions. It's trauma, it's unhealthy, and if companies are not courageous enough to say that, I think we'll never move forward. So then from a brand perspective, what does that mean? I love what Sunmi is saying about listening and learning being in action. But I think we have to listen and learn and then figure out a meaningful action to take that will positively affect and accelerate change. So I'll talk about in our own backyard, specifically, maybe some examples. So in Georgia, there is no hate crime legislation on the books. We are one of very few states that do not have hate crime legislation on the books at the state level. And so for our organization and for the large companies and other companies, leaders in Atlanta, we are galvanizing them right now, asking to, signing to a letter, but also you, CEO, you, leader, call the state house, tell them to do something. And I think this is important. You, company, don't just sign your name to letters, but you, company, you, leader, put your name on something and say something specific externally right now about what you will do. So I think hate crimes legislation is one example of that in our community. I think, again, though, thinking about the systemic nature of all of this, companies being willing to actually do more than give some backpacks to some kids in your underprivileged neighborhood. You got to do something to help affect the system that is in place around education that continues to, hold Black people sort of down and oppress a people. I think there are things that we can do related to workforce development in communities, policy that we can work on as corporations. I think there are policies we can work on specific to things like minimum wage. If you think of healthcare disparities, there's real policy that companies can push for right now and hold leaders in government accountable for putting in place and enacting. I think, it's one thing to say diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and have these great aspirations in our companies. It's nice. It's one thing to say, I hear you, Black people. I know you are hurting. I don't really need your sympathy right now, quite honestly. My ancestors made me for this. I need you to act. I need you to act. I need you to be an active ally, not a passive ally who values the experience of Black people, your Black customer, your Black colleagues, and does something to make that experience in this country better. That's what I think. It might look different in different states and different cities. There are probably things that we can advocate for at the national level as well. But people need to do that work and ask your employees because the employees actually have real ideas if you engage them.
Yeah, Jerilan, that seems like great words about employee engagement, but also about actions, not symbolism and a meme on social media. What's your take on it, and what would your advice be to your own brands and to your own company, but also business generally, in terms of making, because otherwise it just seems we're going to come back to this every 2 or 3 years and we're not moving forward. Have we moved forward since 4 years ago? It doesn't seem that we have very much.
I would say that, I second everything that Deisha said. Everyone on this call has said some good points. We've got to be, with our brands, authentic about where we are on the journey. The listening is a really big piece for us, to listen differently. I think we're going to use this situation, this very unfortunate situation, as a catalyst for clarity around what we stand for. We tried to make that very clear, in the call for unity message that we sent out this weekend. I think what we're planning to do is really make sure that we have a roadmap for systemic impact. So rather than, relying strictly on philanthropy, we want to look at how we can make a difference in the communities where we operate. Again, don't have the answers right now, but I think that's really the key to making an impact. I think that this situation that we're in is almost existential in terms of what's going on in society right now. And we really have to understand the negative impact it can have on our future as a country, as businesses, as people, as humanity, if we don't work to stamp out racial injustice, inequality, it will hold us all back from living the lives that we know that we're, capable of leading and that we can create for others. So again, just the roadmap for systemic impact is where we're focused right now. More to come on that.
Yeah, Jerilan, and there has been some coverage over the recent days about the franchisees of brands like Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, Wendy's, not part of your company, but where the CEO of the franchises was making donations to President Trump's campaign. Is that an area where an overarching brand like Yum should take part, or is that that it could be seen as a risky thing to do, but is that the type of actions we're talking about here? How do you address things like that?
We have 1,000 franchisees in the U.S. and just like our customers, they fall on a spectrum, just like we all do. We know that at Yum and our brands that we will stand for unity moving forward. This is a fork in the road. We will stand for unity. We will stand against bias, racism, intolerance, hate, and we will look to have a very inclusive and diverse workplace, taking meaningful action. So our franchisees will absolutely be on the journey with us on that, and we're looking forward to it. We've had conversations across all of the brands in terms of what we can do going forward, and we'll be making progress. I can tell you that. Sunmi,
from the agency point of view, what are you advising your clients and brands to do, and what difference can they make that's beyond purpose washing? We hear that phrase a lot where people are saying the right things, but they're not doing the right things. And again, the employee engagement thing appears to be a big starting point here, because that's where everybody starts, where the conversations start, and then that spreads out into communities more widely.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned really about the importance of conversation. So on Monday, we had a global town hall, and it wasn't our usual because it was really centered on our people. And we featured Wayne Reed, who is an assistant controller in our New York office. And he has very much the experience with this, sadly so, because his brother was killed at the hands of police back in 1998. He wrote a book that actually just came out this year that we talked about. And so he shared from his personal experience. And it was so informative in the sense that, after the lights and the cameras go away, I know what the Floyd family is going to go through. This is going to continue to happen. If we don't remember the Floyd family, this is going to continue to happen. So it was incredible to just have his story shared with all of us. But I think the other kind of important thing around that is just as this moment is not only about George Floyd and his family, we have to remember that this is about systems of oppression, systems of racism. And you brought up the point about, as a purpose agency and purpose washing. I believe for an organization, we believe as an organization that in order to really live out your purpose or be a purpose organization, you have to live that purpose, right? Before you can really tell that purpose. So that's one thing that I would share there. And the other thing that I just think is so important that I would tell brands is we don't care about your damn brand aspirations. We don't want to hear about your values. We want to see you living those aspirations. We want to see you living those values. And I think this is a moment really in our communications profession that we need to take a cue from others that are incredibly courageous right now, that are risking their lives, whether it be COVID-19 or in the face of, as these protests are going on with the brutality that is taking place, that we need to take a cue from that. And we need to think about how to be courageous in this moment as we think about our own organizations and systems that need to be addressed, as well as the other spheres of influence that we have with our clients and within our communities.
Yeah, thank you, Sunmi. Craig, how do you as brands at GM, you've got some of the most high-profile brands in the world. How do you make sure you're not just virtue signaling, that you are trying to make real change and trying to demonstrate through your actions and not through just some piece of communication that isn't authentic?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and I know, Deisha, you've made the point in the past around the importance of taking risks and brands wanting to take risks. And I will say, before we wipe aside the notion of values, I think it's really important to at least engage in a conversation around values, because from that, we will be able to extract some of the actions that we have. I do recognize that values can be platitudes, but they can also be a bit of a foundation. And that's what I found to be the case, for instance, at P&G, which I think leveraged its voice and its brands and did take risks. I think the important thing that we have to recognize here is the systemic nature of this. And if we sort of talk about this in the abstract and on the peripheries, nothing's going to happen. And when you think about things from a systemic perspective, you recognize that there are elements of the financial infrastructure, there are elements of the education infrastructure, there are elements of the healthcare infrastructure. There is a wide sea of things that a brand can look at, touch, and say, I'm going to do something about that. Things about, if you think about over-incarceration and the systemic issues that presents. You think about collateral consequences of when someone's actually been in prison, comes out the other side and has nothing available to them because the system is fundamentally broken. Brands need to engage in those conversations. Those are the things that we can touch and feel and influence and change that start to fundamentally get at the systemic element of this. The platitude up here of, I stand with you and whatnot doesn't actually get into the elements of many things that a brand can touch. A brand can find its way in on this in an authentic way, in a way that resonates, and in a way that makes a difference. And so I've been involved in conversations in brands who have taken on over-incarceration, who have taken on access to healthcare, who have taken on access to financial infrastructure. These are the things that systemically are so broken that brands have the opportunity, and I think in today's world, the obligation to start to touch. But all of that does come from a value system. So there's room for both of those here. But I think the very discrete elements of, if you look at the systemic elements of this and how it breaks down, which of those things can this brand or this company touch and influence? And in the aggregate, that's how we're going to drive the change.
Yeah, Deisha, we do seem to have something of a leadership vacuum. I mean, not just in the United States, but also in the world. And we've seen that over COVID, in that the measures have in some of the most advanced countries just don't seem to have been able to cope with that health pandemic. And now with the events of Memorial Day, our president seems to be pouring fire onto the flames, petrol onto the flames, with very inflammatory comments about looting and shooting, reclaiming the streets, almost paramilitary style imagery, seemingly more concerned with a photo op than actually thinking about salving the country and bringing peace to the streets, and also addressing the issue of police brutality against Black people. I wanted you to just maybe talk about that for a little bit, but also then in that vacuum, is there a role for business to step up and play that leadership role? And they do have to take risks, because a lot of things rely on government for contracts, for taxation issues, etc. But what's your take on that?
So when I was thinking about this conversation, Steve, last night, I wrote myself some notes. And one of the things I wrote down, I know it even without looking down at my notes, is that racism is not a political issue. I mean, racism is just racism. And so, leadership vacuum, I guess we can talk about that in a variety of ways. There are those who say that those who are fighting for justice right now lack leadership. There are those who say we lack leadership at the state level, the federal level. There's not, anyone who's inspiring change from the top. But I have to, sort of push back against that in a way, because I think there is real leadership at the grassroots level. I think people inside of companies and communities have found a way and are finding ways to make their voices heard. And I actually think when we think about how that is playing out in the form of protests, and whether it's, a peaceful protest or otherwise, I think we have to sort of tune in to the fact that people are sick and tired of being sick and tired, as Fannie Lou Hamer would say, and that we do have leadership at the grassroots level, even if that is just leadership in our homes. People are finding a way to try to make a difference. And I don't know what you're sort of wanting to say on that, but I don't care what's happening in the White House. Like I just right now, I don't care. I care about my kids being able to go outside and play and be safe. I care about my husband being able to get in his car and drive up the street without, fear of police brutality. I care about being able to speak my truth inside of a company without fear of retaliation and in fact being valued. That's what I care most about right now. Screw what's happening in the White House, as far as I'm concerned. I think we have to turn our listening ear to those who actually have found their voice and are saying the right things and are making the strong suggestions that we need to listen to and act on. That's my point of view. And I feel like I can say that loudly and proudly, even though my organization represents UPS and Home Depot and Delta and all of these other big companies in town. I also think that we should give credit where credit is due to the CEOs of large companies in particular who have stood up and said the right things, their employees, and are speaking truth to power at the government and state level and federal level. I think we have to also acknowledge that we can't fall into the trap of focusing only on the negative right now, in my view. It's not healthy. It's not healthy. So I personally have turned off the TV. In some instances, I tune in and I got to tune out, because we have to, those of us who are doing the work can't do the work if we're not taking care of our mental health. And so I think that we also have to think about that.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, if you spend any time watching the TV or especially going on social media, you almost give up the will to do anything. Jerilan, what's your view on business and leadership and filling a vacuum that doesn't appear to be there?
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with Deisha that this is really about humanity. This racism that we're dealing with right now, it's about the future of humanity. So we've all got to get behind that. It's really not a political issue, even though some might try to politicize it. I think we've got to live out the hashtag, we're in this together. So we need to come together. So I think, businesses can be, a catalyst for partnership, across bipartisan lines, with governments, with local community groups. I think what we're going to see in this situation is that companies and local and state governments are going to step into that leadership gap. And they're going to have to work together, as well as with the White House. But I think that's how we'll get through this, really, is more of that grassroots activation, working across boundaries, and realizing it's not political.
Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes left. I know you have to shoot off quickly, but just your final thoughts on that, leadership and business, and where we go from here. What one thing would you like to see?
Thanks, Steve, for the opportunity to connect with everyone. I so strongly believe in the power of the workplace to affect change. I know that because coming from a diverse office, racially diverse office in my own place of work, is that opportunity to just be in each other's lives, to have more than one token friend of various ethnicities just gives us so much more richness in just certainly personally, but in the ways that we think about things and approach problems. And that really has not been happening really across the board. So again, what I will just kind of reiterate what I shared before is just that I think this is a really incredible moment. It is not just a media moment. And I think for brands and organizations that are thinking that way, is we're really, really missing the boat, that this is really a moment for transformation. I hope that we will seize that moment.
Got it. Thank you, Soon-Mi, for joining us. And Craig, just to finish off the discussion, where does leadership, business play a role in leadership? And what's one thing would you like to see happen as a top priority next?
Yeah, I think business and leadership in business, however I want to say that, needs to really kind of make this an institutional part of what they think about, an integrated part of what they think about all the time. And I think if there's not that cultural commitment to it from a company perspective, you run the risk of pushing it to the side or not actually owning what needs to happen within your sphere of influence and control. The one thing that I would really love to see every company do is to look at the map of the systemic elements that are driving the implorable racism today, figure out which elements of that they can address, pick one, two, or more, and just own the fact that you can change that.
Great, thank you, Craig. Deisha, I want to give you the last word. What one thing, I know it's going to take more than one thing, but what one thing would you like to see happen next to really make some real change in what's going on in our society?
That's a hard question for me, Steve. I think that there's no way to boil it down to one thing for people to do. I think that the realities of systemic oppression and racism in this country are much, they're vast and they're much deeper than one thing. I think it actually would not be, I think it would have the alternative intent. We just decide to focus on one thing. We have to focus on the myriad of things nationally and in our local communities and in our homes and in our workplaces. I think someone in our courageous conversation on Monday maybe said it best, like we as business people, I think, need to focus on the unintended consequences of some of our business decisions. Again, how they play out in our community and how they play out in our own workplaces. I think perhaps focusing there, starting there, what are the unintended consequences that might be able to inform brands and companies as they go about trying to change their own practices such that we can undo some of the systems. And then I do want to say, I mean, I read this quote to my team last week on Thursday or Friday, which inspired a rich conversation and then inspired some action for our own organization. And I feel like I want to read it to you, Steve, and anyone who's listening. It says, if we wanted to, people of color could burn the world down for what we have experienced, are experiencing, but we don't. How stunningly beautiful that our sacred respect for the earth, for life, is deeper than our rage. So on a positive note, I believe that's the reality. People of color, we are in a tough spot. Like the articles say, your Black friends are not okay, in particular right now. But we also find a respect for Earth and for humanity that makes us want to turn our rage into action. And advance the country and our world. So I hate to speak on behalf of all the Black people, so I should say that on behalf of myself. I really do align with that quote personally.
Thank you, Deisha, for that, and thank you for your contribution. Thank you, Jerilan. Thank you, Soon-Mi. Thank you, Craig, for joining us for this discussion with leaders like the four of you and others. I think we can take this forward, but it's such a, as you've said, Deisha, it's such a difficult discussion, and it's got to change into real action, and it has to happen quickly, for sure. So, but thank you for joining us for this important discussion. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.